My name is Marian Blake, and at 67, I thought I finally understood how quiet a house could feel when the person you love is no longer in it. This morning, I was standing on the landing with my suitcase in hand, ready for my first trip since my husband, Paul, passed. I told myself that leaving for a few days would be a small step toward living again. The house felt calm, soft, almost like it was wishing me well. Ethan had already left for work after dropping by to give me a hug and a rushed goodbye. His wife, Kayla, stayed behind, saying she'd lock up and make sure the stove was off. It sounded thoughtful enough, so I didn't question it. I simply went upstairs to grab the blue scarf Paul bought me on our last Christmas together. That's when I heard her voice. It drifted up from the kitchen, low at first, then sharper, clearer. I stopped halfway down the stairs, one hand on the railing, listening because something in her tone felt wrong. "She's leaving any minute," Kayla said. "As soon as she's gone, call the movers. We'll take the master bedroom. She can use the little guest room downstairs. It'll be easier for everyone." My chest tightened. Movers? Master bedroom? I leaned forward, barely breathing. "And make sure they bring the big truck," she continued. "Her furniture can go to the garage. Once our stuff's in, it'll feel like home. She won't push back." I felt the air go thin around me. The scarf slipped from my hand and brushed my ankles. But I didn't dare move. My own daughter-in-law was planning to move into my house the moment I stepped onto a plane. Not asking, not offering to help, deciding. A heat rose in me, not loud, not wild, just steady, like something long asleep finally opening its eyes. I walked downstairs quietly. Kayla turned, smiling as if she hadn't just redrawn the map of my life. "All set for your trip?" she asked. I didn't answer. I stepped past her, opened the front door, and climbed into the taxi waiting outside. "Airport?" the driver asked. I looked back at the house Paul and I built together, at the home someone else had just tried to claim. "No," I said. "Take me downtown. I need to see my attorney." When the taxi pulled away from my house that morning, I kept my eyes on the rear window until the roofline slipped out of view. I felt strangely steady, as if shock had frozen every emotion inside me, but the steadiness didn't last. By the time the driver stopped at a red light, I felt that familiar ache rising in my throat, the same one that had lived with me ever since Paul died. Grief and betrayal do something similar to the body. They both hollow you out before you even realize what's missing. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. The truth was, I hadn't always been this fragile. Before Paul's heart gave out on a cold February morning, I was still someone who cooked big Sunday breakfasts and took long walks with the dog we never quite managed to train. Paul had a laugh that filled every corner of the house, the kind of sound that made ordinary days feel like they mattered. When he died, the house didn't just go quiet. It felt abandoned, as if the walls themselves were waiting for footsteps that would never come back. Ethan tried. He really did. He came by almost every weekend after the funeral, fixing things that didn't really need fixing, bringing groceries I didn't ask for. And he brought Kayla. At first, I was grateful. She was warm in a practiced way, always arriving with a casserole dish or a scented candle, as if she were auditioning for a part she wasn't sure she wanted. I didn't mind. Grief makes you generous. It teaches you to accept kindness even when it feels slightly off-key, because the alternative is being alone. I remember the first time Kayla offered to reorganize my kitchen cabinets. It was barely a month after Paul passed. She stood with her hands on her hips, looking around like an interior designer surveying a client's home. "You've got great space in here, Marian," she said. "You should really use it better. Let me help, Before I could respond, she'd already moved half my dishes onto the counter. Ethan smiled at me, promising it would only take a minute. I let her do it. I told myself it didn't matter. But that night, when I reached for the mug Paul always used and found it in a different place, something small inside me stung. Still, I pushed it down. I pushed everything down for months. There was the weekend they brought over several plastic bins, saying they didn't have room in their apartment and asking if they could store just a few things in my garage. When the bins multiplied and a second set of shoes appeared beside my door, I convinced myself it was temporary. Young couples struggle, I told myself. They need help. Paul would have wanted me to be generous. Then came my 66th birthday. Ethan and Kayla insisted on throwing a small dinner at my house. They showed up early, Kayla carrying bags of decorations, Ethan holding a cake box in both hands. I could hear them whispering in the living room as I set plates on the dining table. When I stepped in, Kayla had already moved my old oak chairs against the wall to make room for a folding table she'd brought from their apartment. "This will be easier for everyone," she said with a bright smile. "Your chairs are lovely but a little sentimental." She didn't mean it as an insult. That somehow made it worse. The night ended with a mess I cleaned alone, the smell of frosting and spilled wine lingering in the air. I remember sitting on the bottom stair afterward, staring at the handmade birthday banner Kayla had taped crookedly above the mantel. It said, "Happy birthday," and Marian, in bright colors, but somehow the house felt smaller than before, as if parts of it were already slipping out of my hands. My sister Linda told me she saw all of this coming. She called often, always asking how I really was, not the polite version I gave everyone else. One afternoon, after Ethan and Kayla had spent the entire day helping me reorganize the living room, I broke down on the phone and told her I felt like a guest in my own house. She didn't sugarcoat it. "You need boundaries," she said. "People don't respect what you don't protect." I knew she was right, but knowing and doing are miles apart. I was lonely. I missed the sound of another person moving through the house. Even if that person rearranged my cupboards and left their shoes where Paul's used to sit. That's the thing no one tells you about grief. It makes you vulnerable to anything that looks like companionship. And so, when Ethan asked one evening if they could stay with me, just for a little while because their landlord was planning to sell the building, I opened my mouth to say no and somehow heard myself say yes instead. It wasn't logic. It was fear. Fear of empty rooms. Fear of fading memories. Fear that if I didn't hold on to the pieces of family I still had, I'd lose them too. Looking back, I can see the moment the balance shifted. It wasn't in the big things, it was in the quiet ones. The casserole dish on the counter, the shoes by the door. The birthday banner still hanging days later because I didn't have the heart to take it down. All these small concessions added up. Shaping the path to the morning, I stood frozen on the stairs, listening to Kayla plan how she'd take my bedroom as easily as she'd taken my cabinets, my garage, and my silence. What I didn't know then was that the day I left for that trip, the day they thought I'd be gone and out of the way, would become the day I finally stopped making myself small. Ethan and Kayla moved in on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of day when the sky feels heavy enough to tip everything off balance. I stood at the doorway holding a dish towel, watching them unload their car. They carried boxes labeled baby plans, winter clothes, and a third one simply marked MISC. That one worried me the most. Miscellaneous things tend to grow roots faster than you expect. I told myself it would only be for a month or two. Ethan promised they would pay the utilities, buy groceries, and help with repairs. They were transitioning, he'd said. Just transitioning. I tried to breathe through it, tried to remind myself that families help each other. But the truth was already taking shape beneath the surface like a hairline fracture. Quiet. then widening. The first week was manageable. Ethan left early for work each morning, always calling out, "Love you, Mom," as he shut the door. Kayla drifted through the kitchen after him, wearing slippers that whispered across the hardwood floors. She'd make coffee, scroll through her phone, place her cup on the counter without a coaster, and wander off again. She was polite enough, but every movement felt as if she were rearranging more than space, as if she were rearranging the air. By the second week, more of their belongings appeared. A stack of folded blankets on the couch, a diffuser releasing lavender mist in the hallway, shoes multiplying by the door. I didn't say anything. I kept wiping countertops, folding towels, making room in drawers just to avoid conversations I didn't know how to start. One afternoon, as I returned from the grocery store, I found Kayla in the master bedroom, my bedroom, measuring the wall with a metal tape measure. She startled when she saw me and forced a bright smile. "Oh, I was just checking dimensions. I read that pregnant women sleep better closer to the bathroom, and this room is perfect." I clutched the grocery bag against my stomach. "Kayla, I haven't agreed to anything about changing rooms." She blinked, as if I'd interrupted a plan already set in motion. "Of course not. We're just thinking ahead. Stress isn't good for the baby." There it was again. Stress. Baby. Needs. Comfort. Words that floated like little hooks. I nodded slowly, though the room had started to feel too small, the walls inching closer. I carried the groceries to the kitchen and set them down with hands that weren't quite steady. That evening, Ethan tried to reassure me. He sat beside me on the couch, rubbing his forehead the way he used to before exams. "Mom, she's just excited. And the apartment situation has been rough on her. We don't want to be a burden." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think I was imagining the growing sense of displacement, the way I sometimes paused before entering a room because it no longer felt like mine. So I swallowed it. Again. But the house noticed. Houses always do. A few days later, I woke up early and found Kayla in the kitchen rearranging my spice cabinet. She worked with fast, efficient hands, placing jars in rows that made sense only to her. She didn't look up when she said, "Your system was really hard to navigate. This'll be easier for all of us." All of us. The phrase lingered in the air long after she left. Linda visited that same weekend. She walked in, looked around the living room, and raised an eyebrow. "When did you get this?" she asked, pointing at a large framed print leaning against the wall, a modern abstract piece in colors I'd never choose. "It's theirs," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Linda studied me, then took my hand. "Marian, this isn't temporary. Not to them. You need to see that. But seeing something and being ready to face it are different things." I still wasn't ready. The shift came quietly. On an evening when the three of us sat down for dinner, I'd made roasted chicken and vegetables, a recipe Paul used to love. Ethan complimented it, but Kayla barely touched her plate. She kept glancing at her phone, irritation rippling through her every few seconds. "Finally," she said, "my mom and dad want to come over next weekend. We'll host dinner here." Before I could respond, she added, "It'll just be easier. Our apartment is a mess, and you've got the space." Ethan hesitated, sensing the tension, but he didn't contradict her. The decision had already been made without me. Kayla stood, gathering her barely touched plate. "Also, we should probably plan on moving things around before they come. My parents will need a comfortable place to sit. Maybe the armchairs could go in the garage for now." She walked away before I could form a sentence. I sat there staring at the empty space she left behind. That night, long after they'd gone to bed, I walked through the house with the lights off, My footsteps echoed differently, as if the floors were asking me why I'd let strangers rearrange the life Paul and I built. I rested my hand on the doorframe of the master bedroom, feeling its shape, its history, its warmth. I realized then that if I didn't draw a line somewhere, I would lose not just a room, but the entire meaning of this home. And still, I said nothing. Yet, because silence has a way of becoming habit before you even notice you've stopped speaking. The following weekend arrived faster than I wanted it to, and with it came the faint, restless hum that always precedes something unwelcome. I spent the morning cleaning, more out of habit than preparation, though I could already hear Kayla's voice in my mind, telling me which dishes to hide and which chairs to move. She insisted her parents needed a space that felt elevated, a word that made me feel as if my home were somehow beneath them. By 3 o'clock, the living room barely resembled itself. Kayla had draped a throw blanket across the couch, pulled my oak side table into the hallway, and placed a decorative tray, one I'd never seen before, on the coffee table. The armchairs Paul and I bought at a yard sale 30 years ago were pushed against the wall like misbehaving children. I felt displaced, restless. But I stayed quiet because Ethan looked tired and pulled in too many directions. He kept giving me apologetic glances, as if silently asking me to make one more compromise for the sake of peace. When Kayla's family finally arrived, she greeted them at the door with a bright excitement I had never seen directed at me. I stepped forward to welcome them, but Kayla moved ahead, filling every pause before I could speak. Her mother complimented the house, calling it quaint. Her father rubbed his shoes on the mat as though debating whether the floor was worthy of his soles. They were polite, but polite in that distant way that lets you know they've already decided who you are. Kayla ushered them into the kitchen. I followed, carrying a platter of roasted vegetables, trying to maintain the sense of home that felt increasingly foreign. Her mother thanked me but didn't look directly at me. Her father asked Ethan how much longer they planned to stay in this arrangement, as though I weren't standing 3 feet away. Dinner dragged on. Conversation swirled around careers, travel plans, baby preparations, topics I usually enjoyed, but I felt like a ghost, passing dishes no one noticed. When dessert was finally over, Kayla began clearing plates while Ethan walked her parents to the door. I stayed behind in the kitchen, grateful for the familiar rhythm of rinsing dishes. That's when I saw it. A small note, written in Kayla's looping handwriting, resting beside the sink. "Thanks for handling the cleanup. Marian. You're the best." A smiley face at the end. Something inside me tightened, not anger exactly, but a cold, clear understanding. In her mind, I wasn't a partner in this home. I was support staff, a placeholder, someone whose presence made life easier while her own future settled neatly into place. That night, after everyone went to bed, I called Linda. I sat at the dining table in the dark, my fingers tracing the wood grain Paul refinished the year Ethan started college. Linda answered on the second ring. "You don't sound good," she said. I took a shaky breath. "They used my house like a rental hall tonight. I didn't even feel like I lived here." She was quiet for a moment. "Marian, you've been generous to the point of disappearing." Her words landed hard. "I don't want to lose Ethan," I whispered. "You won't," she said, "but you will lose yourself if you keep letting them take and take." I knew she was right. I knew it in the same deep, instinctive way a person knows when a storm is coming. But even then, fear wrapped around my ribs, fear of conflict, fear of being alone again, fear of being seen as the unreasonable one. A few days later, as if the universe wanted to force my hand, Kayla announced she was pregnant. The news should have filled me with joy, and in a way, it did. A grandchild. a continuation of something Paul would have loved. Ethan was over the moon, his face softening in ways I hadn't seen since he was a boy. But almost immediately, Kayla began making comments about space, comfort, what was best for the baby. She mentioned that climbing stairs could be hard on her, that she needed a room with more natural light, that the master bedroom, my bedroom, was the safest option. Each time she spoke, it was as if she'd already made the decision and expected me to fall in line. Ethan started bringing home paint samples, holding them up against my bedroom wall while I stood there, gripping the door frame to steady myself. They talked openly about rearranging furniture, buying a crib, installing blackout curtains, as if I were already gone from the space. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the spare room, I heard them whispering in the hallway. "It's temporary," Ethan said. "She'll understand." Kayla sighed dramatically. "I hope so. I can't be stressed right now. It's not good for the baby." That sentence hit me harder than anything else had. It wasn't just an argument. It was a weapon. The kind of weapon a person uses when they expect to win. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the room tilt slightly. My own son was preparing to move me out of my bedroom, and I was letting it happen because silence had become easier than truth. But everything shifted the morning I overheard their plans to call the movers while I was supposedly on a plane. That was the line I could not step over. That was the moment whatever part of me had remained passive finally woke up. I wasn't ready then to confront them directly, but I was ready to stop pretending. And the first step toward reclaiming my home was to understand exactly what they intended to take. Driving back to my house with Linda beside me, I felt strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from certainty. The police car pulled in behind us, its lights off but presence unmistakable. Kayla was standing on the front steps, arms crossed, irritation already forming on her face. Ethan hovered behind her, uneasy, as if he sensed the ground shifting. I walked past them without raising my voice. "You need to stop moving things in," I said. "This isn't happening." Kayla laughed softly, as if humoring a confused elder. "Marian, the truck's already here. We're just getting settled before your flight. No need to make this dramatic." The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said to me, "you're the homeowner, correct?" I handed him my ID and the printed notice from my attorney. "They're here without permission," I said. My hands didn't shake. "Not anymore." The officer turned to Ethan and Kayla. "You've been informed. You can't move in or move belongings without the owner's consent. Everything that's been brought in needs to go back on the truck." Kayla's expression collapsed into outrage. "Are you serious? She's doing this to her own son? I'm pregnant." The officer remained unmoved. "Pregnancy doesn't override property law." Ethan looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in his face softened, the anger draining into uncertainty. But Kayla kept pushing, arguing, pleading, until the officer repeated himself more firmly. In the end, they carried everything back out, the boxes, the mattress, the bins that had quietly multiplied. I watched from the doorway, not triumphant, just steady. When the truck finally backed out of the driveway, Kayla refused to meet my eyes. Ethan lingered. "Mom?" "We'll talk later," he said quietly. I nodded. "We will. When everyone's calm." They left without another word. The house was silent again, but it felt different this time. Less like abandonment, more like exhaling after holding its breath too long. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the walls, the memories Paul and I built. For the first time in months, nothing felt stolen. Weeks passed before Ethan called, months before he showed up with an apology. Eventually, I held my granddaughter in my arms. Healing didn't come fast, but it came honestly and on my terms. This house remains mine. My peace remains mine. And from now on, I intend to protect both.